He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. And just to finish the quote, and when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. That was Friedrich Nietzsche in Beyond Good and Evil from 1886. And it's Thinking Man's Thursday, so the point of that quote, of using that quote, is that we're sweet. It's early morning. The tongue is not quite active yet. We're seeing the pendulum swing. We swung all the way out to give the gays the right to marry, give the gays the right to act like weirdos in public. Now we're seeing it swing back because they were acting like weirdos in public in front of children. Now they're performing fetish drag shows to kids at their own libraries, and yeah, right about here is where we are right before it smacks the fucking idiots in the face. Right? And understand, I'm absolutely all for protecting children. Duh. Anybody who's watched any of my content here or on Sultans knows this. But what we have to be careful of, and we're already seeing evidence of it, is that we don't go and allow our zeal to carry us into a place where we're suddenly becoming cruel. I've had the discussion with people before about pedophiles, for instance. Don't know if I'm going to be able to leave this one up on YouTube. It will end up on Rumble anyway, but we'll see. I've had this discussion about pedophiles. Loads of people recommend wood chipper and things like that. Now that's halfway to a meme. In some cases, really bad cases, yeah, I can kind of get behind the idea of torturous execution. But for the most part, if you're going to use a death penalty, my thinking is it should be as dispassionate as possible, though it's almost impossible to be dispassionate in the case of someone who rapes children. Or sexually assaults children, whatever terminology you want to use there. But the whole point of the quote is to ensure that you don't become the type of monster that you're trying to avoid allowing to exist within your society. That's part of the reason the justice system should be the determiner of the death penalty for a pedophile. Should be. Not always has to be. Not always can be. Can't currently always be trusted to render a good decision. But if we assume that the death penalty is instated for people who are child rapists, and we'll use the term egregious or grievous or whatever, those who do extremely monstrous acts, not someone who just likes to go around grabbing little girls by the bum, that still deserves punishment. I don't think it necessarily deserves the death penalty. But, and that's not for me to determine anyway, and every circumstance is going to be different. But, and here's where that but gets very big. If you're going to use a death penalty as a punishment, and you want part of it to be torturous, you need to be sure that the person deserves torture. The problem is, that determination is extremely difficult. And it's far better to err on the side of swift, decisive, clean. Or, yeah, clean and quick is my preference. For example, what Gary Plauché did. That was clean and it was quick. Well, it wasn't super clean, but still. But it didn't involve torturing the perpetrator. And I'm going to avoid the P word from here on out a little bit. And it doesn't even matter if it's one of those P people. The Muslims who essentially assassinated at least one soldier in London, and then stood around on camera, bloodied hands, talking about why they did it. Those guys deserve the death penalty too. You know why? Because you committed murder in open view of everybody. I'm sorry, but I think the cops should have clocheted them. Just walk up, bang, bang, done. Save the taxpayers a shit ton of money. Save the justice system a shit ton of time. Why? Because putting those guys in prison for the rest of their lives isn't rehabilitation. Putting anyone in prison for the rest of their life with no chance of getting out, with the assumption of no hope of rehabilitation, that's a death sentence. But it's a very long one. And again, we're into the torturous territory. So yeah, if we're going to use a death penalty, we have to avoid becoming monsters with it. Cruel and unusual is the two words that should never be used to describe punishments. The point of punishment is to make someone better. If there's no way to make someone better, why bother punishing them? Simply eliminate them. Now, this isn't any sort of call to action or any sort of recommendation. This is simply where I'm coming from in terms of how we deal with people who do wrong. And for those of you who are slightly new to my channel, you may not have heard me talk about how I have had positions where I counseled ex-inmates. But the people that I met in that situation were the redeemables. At least as far as the justice system was concerned, these were people who had a chance at redemption, at being actually rehabilitated. Most of the guys I met were recidivist. And some, quite a few, were severe recidivists over the course of decades in at least one case that I can recall. And while I still take my, I suppose we could call it an NDA, but it's essentially a guarantee of confidentiality. So I won't use any names, and I won't even use any specifics to describe any crimes or anything. But several of these guys were, in some cases, essentially products of their environment, though nature does have something to do with you. Since we're talking about old Germans, I might as well bring up Jung. But the nature-nurture debate is, there's no better way to illustrate the need for that discussion than to look at criminality. If you look at someone's background, you will find people who were raised in privilege and people who were raised in poverty. And if they're convicts, there's no telling, no prediction, no predictability from their background in a lot of cases. Now, in the case of some people, because they come from in some cases, generational gang activity, you will sometimes find people who are almost guaranteed to end up in that lifestyle. You also tend to find that some of those people are the most dedicated to getting away from it. Because once they get a taste of either prison or the real world, having left prison and gone to work, they would rather stay out of prison and work. They don't like being in the life, we'll call it. But just to come back to my original point, since I'm almost 10 minutes in, if you're going to institute a death penalty for people who attack children, and I use the word attack because it doesn't necessarily have to be sexual. If you're going to use the death penalty for these people, or for anyone who does commit an egregious crime, something horrendous, then it should not be a case of, we don't think this person will ever rehabilitate at all. There's 0% chance they ever will be, safe to re-enter society. Then why would you ever keep that person in jail? Why would you keep them on the taxpayer dole? Why would you allow them to continue to be a burden to society financially when they were a burden to society in terms of their safe conduct? It makes far more sense to simply take them out back, spend the dollar, back of the head. Clean, quick, done. Now, there are a lot of people who are of the opinion that, no, this person should be made to suffer as much as their victims did. Well, you can't do that. In the case of someone who predates on children, you absolutely cannot make them suffer to the level that their victims did. Because they aren't children when you start victimizing them, when you start doing them the harm. Children carry the scars of trauma their entire lives. Yes, some of us do get over some of our childhood traumas to the point that they no longer affect our lives directly, but the memory is always there. And the best way to put it, the best policy, in my opinion, is to remove those people, not just from the gene pool, but from the possibility of ever doing harm again. And people do escape from prisons. There are currently lifers, people who have no practical ability to get out of jail here in Canada for the rest of their lives, who are sitting in minimum security prisons. These are places you can almost literally just walk away from. In some cases, minimum security prisons here in Canada actually have outwork programs where the offender will go into the community to work, and that's fine if that person is safe doing it, and some of them probably are. But the risk is pretty fucking high. If you don't think these people are ever going to get out, why would you put them in a cage and force them to pay rent on that cage? That seems cruel and unusual to me. Just food for thought. Anyway, guys, I hope you're having a good day. Well, I do apologize if this was a bit blackpilling, but I also hope you continue to have better days and rise again until lambs become lions. Bye-bye.